Recording.
Alright guys, studio is live, mics are up. We're live on Freshly Pressed 981. It's a program that brings you detailed analysis of our newspaper stories this morning. You're listening and tuned in to Smooth 98.1 and Smooth Breakfast with Ayo.
And Valentine.
Good morning to you in
Good
Lagos.
morning, Lagos.
Join us by sending us messages and observations to the stories that we're treating this morning. Send it through WhatsApp to
0809 4440981. That's 0809 4440981. You can also send us a message on Twitter. Follow us at Smooth981FM and use the hashtag Lagos. Freshly Pressed 981.
It's a Filthish Friday. It's okay. We have in the studio to analyze these stories with us. We have Fred. Fred is back. Hello, Fred.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Fred.
Good to see you. And as always, looking dapper. And we have Folu Storms is our handle. Good morning.
Excellent. Good morning,
Hello,
Lagos. Am I looking dapper? Am I the dapper one? Or was that Fred?
No, you know.
Oh,
You're
thank
your
you.
boss earring.
I'm bossy.
Definitely
Man.
bossy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
She doesn't have a bossy earring, but I'm just hating on you. Oh, you do.
She does have a
Now
boss.
I see it. Because you two can see it on our YouTube handle much later. And of course, Tunde Okufi is joining us this morning. Hello, Tunde.
Morning, Valentine.
Good morning. Glad to have you in the studio. Lagos, let's start very quickly with this first story from Thisday newspaper. The headline reads, Polls, federal government shuts borders as police restrict vehicular movement. So we have the election starting in less than 24 hours. And apparently from this report, we have understood that a lot of measures have been put in place by INEC. They're being proactive to ensure that things like over violence are preempted and checked before it happens. Vehicular movements have been restricted for Saturday, except for those who are going out to vote to exercise their civic responsibilities between 6 a.m. To 6 p.m. There are rumors milling around, people spreading fake stories about, restriction of movements expressly, but INEC is taking steps to ensure that everybody is sensitized to know how these activities will be checked. Talking about those who are not going out for the purpose of voting would necessarily not need to be outside or found at several spots. Well, take us through this story, Fulu.
Okay, so yes, the acting Inspector General of Police, Mohammed Adamu, has said very clearly that the restriction of vehicular movement will be from Saturday morning. Now, this is important for all of us to note because the last election cycle, we were restricted from moving from the night before. So I was looking out for this information so people know. But between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., there will be no movement on Saturday. They are saying that regardless of who your uncle or your daddy is, you will be arrested if you are caught moving within those times. But it's also very important that we note that a lot of people are urging everyone to go out and vote. It's a very exciting time. Perhaps this voting cycle or this election cycle is not as fraught or as high tension as 4 years ago, where we really felt that something different could happen and that could trigger certain things in the country. I don't feel that is the atmosphere across the country. I think people are curious though. We are seeing more people who are perhaps trying to get more intellectually involved in the process. A lot of people still campaigning right to the very last minute. So it will be exciting, but there are things that we should be taking a note of on election day. Go out and vote, do protect your vote. Try not to talk to people about who it is that you're going to vote for, especially when you're around the polls. Because we do know that, life, religion, politics can make people very emotional. Things can get quite sensitive at that point. We know that the defense chief as well has warned us that there are plans for some people are planning to use military uniform, paramilitary agencies or to impersonate them, so to cause a little bit of havoc. So just be sensitive to that. And if you see something that doesn't look right, please get yourself to a safe space.
Yes.
But it should be an exciting time in general. We're just seeing a lot of movement, a lot of preparation, and the votes will be counted at the end of the day. So get your PVC down.
And do you find it interesting that security personnel have been deployed to certain locations like this, the case of Kaduna, for instance, and Akwa Ibom as cases in point?
I don't think it's interesting. I think it's necessary when you know that there are areas that are trouble spots or where you are concerned as to the sort of reaction you're going to have in certain areas. I also commend Osho and Anambra states who said, listen, we're going to declare work-free days so that people can go out and vote. And also talking to people out in certain areas, there's certain artisans that right now you will not find in Lagos that maybe you're used to working with, who've traveled to their hometowns to vote. And I think that's very impressive and very indicative of the people that are making decisions in Nigeria, you know, because a number of us, I'll say us in our small percentile of thinking we're so special, we're so thoughtful. People say, oh, it's inconvenient, I'm not going to go here. But the reality of the country is, if you register in a certain area, you have to be in that area if you want to vote. And for a person who is not particularly educated, some of the artisans that are not as literate, as we think that certain people should be, they know enough that their votes are important enough for them to take time off, go to their home state and vote. So I suggest that if there are people out there who are still considering, who are still on the edge, I mean, today is a good day to get involved, and just know that the traffic will be lit as well.
So, I mean, just a quick question. It's only vehicular movement that's restricted, yeah? So,
yes, as far as
you can walk, if you can walk from here to Gorodo, you're good.
You can start trekking. We'll see how people ask you questions along the way.
I say that specifically so police don't invoke things like, jaywalk, things that are no longer part of our law to say, oh, you're jaywalking.
Which is why INEC initially reminded people to make sure that if they've changed their location, maybe their residence, they could actually move their voting areas close to their residential areas. To
yes, but that's been problematic, and we know how difficult that's been for people. Some people have been in the process of trying to move their polling units for 3 years, plus. So again, we do ask INEC and INEC officials to really look into the system and to make it a bit more streamlined, so more citizens can feel included. Because right now there is a feeling of exclusion. A lot of people feel that it's just not geared up to enable them to exercise their civic rights.
Thank you very much, Folu. Let's move on to our next story very quickly from the Vanguard newspaper. The headline reads, 91 million Nigerians now living in extreme poverty. We've heard about this phenomenon. It's left us uncomfortable from last year. Well, the story is up in the news right now. Over 91 million Nigerians are now living in extreme poverty, according to a report from the World Poverty Clock, a Vienna, Austria-based data lab. And the report said at least 3 million Nigerians have slipped into extreme poverty between November 2018 and February of 2019. There seems to be a steady decline, even in the face of Nigeria being ranked, according to the World Bank report of 2014. Even if I'm skeptical if we should still hang on to that report, that Nigeria is one of the fastest growing economies of the world. But what are your thoughts, Fred?
Yeah, so when you look at these numbers a bit deeper, right, because we're being compared to India, so we're now number one compared to India, right? Well, India has a population of 1.3 billion people, so we're talking about like 5% of their population originally, and then they moved 24 million people out of that, right? So to 3.6%. In our case, we're talking about 45% extreme, in this extreme poverty category.
Yes.
So this is really, really terrible for us, actually. Obviously, it's coming right now again, just before the election, so we'll put that in mind as we make decisions on what we're doing, right, tomorrow, who we're voting for. But besides that, just for, this leads to, obviously, there's with this group of people, there's poor health, poor quality of life, everything you think about, like, they're not getting these things. And on top of that, we need to reverse, obviously, the government, and the government needs to put in more to just reverse this trend that's happening right now.
But there's been several poverty alleviation programs in different scales across board, initiated by the federal government, school feeding programs and other programs like that.
Yeah.
Do you think the government is doing enough? Or
the numbers are showing that it's not now.
It's banded.
If 3 million people are moving. Yeah,
social safety net, it's banded. Countries use them as a safety net. When someone, perhaps you go through a difficult period, but the nation is structured such that you will rebound, right? There's no rebound here. So, so it's social handouts in perpetuity, in a sense. Almost others would argue that it's more like you're funding the poverty or poverty mentality.
Exactly.
Right. What are the things that pull us out of education, out of extreme poverty? It's infrastructure, it's education. It's a bunch of all those things. Are we building a nation? This is not new. This extreme poverty. It's just the numbers that change. As our population grows, the numbers increase.
That was something I was going to mention, because as the population is growing, we are going to see some of these indices getting a little bit worse for us. And even if there are measures that are being put in place, so even if we are trying to build a nation, It's not
We're
going
not
to show.
building it
Yes.
quickly enough.
Yes, we can't even based on our numbers. I don't think. But, you know.
And we need to create more jobs. So create an environment where people can create businesses that create more jobs that are sustainable. Because just as you said, just giving handouts doesn't lead to get out of poverty.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's move on to this next one from Guardian newspaper. Portfolio investors gain in Nigeria's $17 billion capital inflow. And this is really emphasizing the fact that a lot of businesses, as they say in this, a lot of investors particularly have been looking at hot money. They describe it as, establishing institutions and staking in existing ones, focusing on capital gains and bonds and money market instruments, really. Tunde, take us through the story and your thoughts.
Look, this again is another thing that is not exactly new. The large the majority of investment that comes into the country is portfolio investors. It's fly by night kind of investments. Overnight hot money. And look, where there's high risk, there's high return, right? And there's high risk in Nigeria. You can't get the kind of returns people make in the developing world in countries like Nigeria. You can't make it in the US where interest rates are much lower. You can't live. I mean, is it Germany and some other European states that the interest rates are actually even negative, right? So where there is high risk, there's high return. So you will always find investors who will be willing to stake the funds or risk the funds for the kind of returns that is really, but they will only risk it for a short period of time. Now, obviously, that means that you're not getting any kind of investment that is bedding down, that is putting roots, that is creating jobs, that is building institutions, building companies, employing people. You really won't get that, but you get this, bandage and, what's the word it escapes now. You get this short-term feel of, okay, there's funds in the country, but those funds are not really staying, and it affects us when those guys need to take their cash out. It affects the value of the naira because there's huge, fluctuations. It affects the state of our reserves. But that's what it is. There almost seems to be next to not a whole lot to invest in the real sector, for instance. So you see a lot of these investments are in the financial sector. So bonds, stocks, government bonds as well. If I were to ask around this table how we're investing our money, most of us are doing this precisely.
Short term.
Points us out. Yeah, it's short term. Investing in bonds, the money market, government stuff. Nobody's investing in the real sector really as much because it's harder
we don't know what that means.
riskier. Yeah, bottom line, So that's it. It is what it is. It represents over 70%. The other thing, another important thing to point out is that FDI was only about 1.1 billion, which is 7% of everything that came in.
That's foreign direct investments.
Foreign direct investments. I mean, that's a reflection that the people who bring money, who look for causes to invest in, don't trust our administrators, government or otherwise. They're just not giving us money to do anything. Meanwhile, in other countries, it's the reverse. FDI is 70% of what is coming in, right? But for us, it's the reverse. Then one final point on this is that the European Union has added us to a blacklist of countries that are not doing enough to fight, to put controls in for terrorist financing and money laundering.
Thank you very much. Valid points, Tunde. Thank you for that.
All right, we'll take this comments from WhatsApp. You can send your messages to 0809440981. This is from Wenga Akomo. He says the other issues there is enough information about voting with index finger and not the thumb. The tip and not the face of the finger. These are matters that everyone should have been aware of a long time ago. We have talked on this yesterday and 2 days ago, and we also talked about the fact that INEC did mention that you can use 10 or your 10, any of your 10, not all of them, any of your 10 fingers, because they were all collected during your biometrics. The only thing that was emphasized was how to do it so that it doesn't run over to the next person, and so your vote is not invalidated. So that's important. Thank you very much for raising that thing down.
All right, Tunde, I'll come back to you for this next story from the Vanguard. MPA BPE hand over Warri Ports Terminal to concessionaire. As part of efforts to increase cargo traffic at Warri Ports, Nigeria Ports Authority and the Bureau for Public Enterprises BPE have handed over the Terminal B of the ports to Ocean and Cargo Terminal Services Limited. Your thoughts on this, please?
Okay, so it's a short story and it's a good story. There's no other way to say it. There's too much pressure on the ports in Lagos. So with all the shoreline that we have,
yes,
why is there so much pressure? on Apapa, right? So this is a good one. The concession, I think it's for $100 million. I couldn't find for it's not in the story, even that amount's not in the story, but I couldn't find for how long the concession is. Used to run for, but it's for 100 million USD. It's good, it falls into that line of, there's always the argument, okay, that they say that the current government likes, big government where they operate everything, right? This is not exactly in that line where the government, brings in a private concessionaire to run it, manage it, and the whole expectation is that it run more efficiently, because, the profits, the principles are entirely different, right? So it's a good idea. We need to see more of this in Warri and other places that are viable, so that we can reduce the pressure on,
Yes.
on Lagos.
Decentralizing the ports. Thank you very much, Tunde, for that.
All right, moving on to our next story here. Lagos seeks private partnership in health insurance scheme. Now, this is according to the State Commissioner for Health, Dr. Jide Idris, and he's talked about, partnership with the private sector, hoping that relationship would help to even drive further the scheme that was launched December 2018 by the governor, Ambade Folu. Great partnership. What's your take on this?
All right, Ayo, thank you. So the story today is from the Guardian paper, but I'm going to go back to the 18th of December last year, which is when this was announced and when it was launched. So essentially, it will be considered to be Nigeria's biggest mandatory health insurance scheme, and they want to see all residents of Lagos be able to access basic health care from a contributory pool of funds. And the state for this year is actually targeting at least 2.5 million residents in 2019. Now, I think it's a great initiative because the reality is a lot of people in Lagos, especially the directed to the poor, that's who the scheme is pretty much focused on, find it quite difficult to pay for things. Even if they do have an HMO or a health insurance provider, there are difficulties sometimes with HMO saying, well, they're not paying the primary healthcare provider. The primary healthcare provider therefore will not provide healthcare for poorer people. So what's different in this situation is that the Lagos State Health Management Agency are saying that providers will be paid directly by them as opposed to the HMOs, because they learned their lessons over the last few years. They're focusing on accessibility, equity, quality, and it's all nice to say. I think again a lot of things are great on paper, it looks good. The implementation is always what it comes down to, and how many people are going to know about this, how much sensitization are they doing, because it's one thing to create a product, to create a service, but are you informing people? Are you explaining to them in detail? Are you getting out to all the areas of Lagos to let them know that you actually do have this? And also I do like that they are partnering with the private sector to ensure that things like certain equipment that's sitting in private hospitals that are not really being used are going to be used for public spaces.
I was going to come to that with regards to infrastructure, and the commissioner saying that infrastructure in Lagos State is insufficient to handle the needs of the people. This is quite worrying because ideally the government should have enough resources, more than the private sector, in providing infrastructure for its people. So to see that they're dependent, is that something that should be a case of worry, and should we be looking at that in budget allocation?
I think that we've been worried about that for a long time. I think it is a part of the systemic failure we've seen in government across the board, where funds are allocated, where plans are made. Again, great plans like these ones, but they're not followed through by the people who are meant to implement them. I mean, if we have stories of sacks of rice rotting away somewhere for IDPs, when people are starving, that should show you exactly what's going on in our systems. So we just hope that this will be better implemented. We hope that the awareness will be better provided, and we hope that the state will, because now that they have contributory funds, because there's a lot of money that's going into this project, that they will focus on developing infrastructure. And like they said, primary healthcare centers first in every community. That's a major key. That's important.
Absolutely. Just to say, 1% of the state's budgetary allocation is going to go to funding this health scheme. All right, moving away from that story, this one is from the Thisday newspaper, and Fred, I'll come to you for this. Malami, Mr. Abubakar Malami SAN, the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, denies directing INEC to postpone Zamfara elections. Now, if you remember, only yesterday was reported in the papers that he wrote a letter to the INEC chairman to call or to suggest or to recommend that the elections in Zamfara will be postponed so that a party could field their candidates. And now he's saying he actually didn't say that, or not technically. Fred, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I guess he's trying to explain what his position is, that he was barely pointing or making alerting INEC, to pay attention to like what has transpired between the courts in regards to the parties. But obviously, he's a government official, right? So it's for the whole population of Nigeria, not a particular party, right?
Yeah.
And there are over 70 parties that are participating in the elections. So it's actually not, whatever it is, he should just hold back himself, right? INEC is capable of, running and making their own decision based on the electoral constitutions, and they know what to do, right? So obviously, it's a good call that everyone called him out on his position.
Yes.
Whether he feels that it was misconstrued or he was doing something else.
No, taken out of context.
Now, following the letter yesterday,
Yeah.
written to the INEC chair, he had reactions from Mr. Olisa Agbakoba, former president of the NBA, had reactions from Chief Michael Zekome, had from Femi who said, and he quoted the Constitution, saying that Section 158, subsection 1 of the 1999 Constitution, INEC shall not be subject to the direction or control of any authority or person. So in essence, even though he is the Attorney General of the Federation, he doesn't have the right to ask INEC not to
He doesn't. And they're fully, if they believe that they're capable of doing free and fair an election, conduct the election, that they're capable of doing what's right in South Africa.
All right.
We have messages on Twitter. Lady Rose says, that's Helen Alfredi. It says, I would really point into our population as the reason for poverty, even as we are compared to India. Really? Well, Lady Rose, the comparison was a population against infrastructural development and, certain facilities being put in place to, especially when it comes to human capital development.
As we just pointed to it as a contributing factor.
Yes.
It's not the sole reason,
Yes.
but it is a factor. You can't deny that.
And your GDP is growing slower than our
Population,
Right.
exactly.
Francis Wanze says, February 16, the day of reckoning is here. It's time for Nigerians to vote. This some unsavory words follow, and then he says, I'm so ready for this election. It's time to take our future into our hands. Please, my fellow Nigerians, my fellow citizens, go out and vote.
We cannot say this enough. Go out and vote, exercise your civic right, and ensure, because at the end of the day, if you don't, you cannot blame anyone. Right, Bankers Committee, good news here, initiates special fund for creative industries, IT. Folu, I see you shaking your head. I know you're very interested in this one. But just to clarify, with regards to creative industries, includes music, movies, fashion, and information technology.
So it's really nice. This decision was taken, as far as we understand it, yesterday, according to the Vanguard newspaper. They want to stimulate these sectors through special funding. Now, what is interesting is ever since the creative industries, shall I say, were added to our GDP numbers, and it caused the country to sort of leap in front and allow us to beat our chest some more. Keep shouting this rhetoric of the greatest, which I will not comment
I think
too
that's
much
something
on.
we must commend the last administration for, because in terms of building that sector, they're quite
Yes,
involved.
they did try that, but I think I will say that even within the sector, there's still several players who have no idea what these funds are, how to access them. Again, which is why sometimes when these initiatives come up, what are the details? What do people need to have in place? How much are you sensitizing the said industries that you're trying to empower? If you're trying to give people access to low interest and long-term financing, which is a great thing in theory, so that they can employ and hire, and so the sector can really grow, and the structures within the sectors can develop, you've got to explain exactly how that's supposed to carry on. What other things are you going to set up? Because it's nice to offer me loans, but what else is there? How else are you developing the sector? That's what I have to say about that. But it is very exciting. It's great news. It's also important to note that they did say that because the U.S. Federal Reserve is likely to keep a moderate rate, so the dollar wouldn't strengthen against our currency, which means that if you do take out a loan, it's not really going to hamper you too much, which is,
and we've heard this story in the creative sector with regards to funding. One of the major issues it talks about is funding. So when you talk about access to loans and low interest rates, obviously definitely that's a very welcome development. It's also important to know that they've identified that the sector would generate a significant amount of employment, given how the Nigerian creative sector has done well in Nollywood, in music, Nigeria being the house of tourism.
But we've got to consider things like, okay, if I as a filmmaker go out and take out this loan, how many cinemas do I have to put my film in to start recouping my costs? Is the government doing enough to tackle piracy, which is eating tremendously into my costs? So it's one thing to say, you're going to offer me these low interest loans, but what in the other supporting structures within that sector are not enabling me to recoup my funds, and the government is not protecting my interest enough for me to be able to say, okay, I know that at least all the money is coming to me. It's bleeding off. Look at when Lionheart came out. the day before, the same day, we saw it on the street.
I accosted someone on the street. I was
I'm
like,
glad you did. Thank you.
The guy was so shocked. Like, I didn't know. I didn't know. I was like, yes, we have to take it very seriously because I was so pained.
But these are real
so,
problems.
so with that kind of investment, we need protection. We need the structures to be in place, and we need the relevant agencies to really do everything that is possible to protect the lifetime investments of the creative sector.
Absolutely. All right, thank you so much. We take one comment from WhatsApp and then we'll go on to our next story. Produce here from Sulere says, how do these international ranking agencies reach their conclusions about certain development indices? Do these agencies go on the streets to extract facts from the people or just
Yes, they
simply
do, actually.
Not all the
extrapolate
time.
based on sampling? If it's by sampling, what is the sample size? That's the big question. For example, I'm aware that lots of construction projects are ongoing around the country with multiplier effects of direct and indirect job creation as well as other intervention activities by the government to provide funding for SMEs. We need to be careful. All right, could you, right, I would have to go on to our next story. I wanted to respond to that, but we'll have to go to the next story. NCC, the Nigerian Communications Commission, has fined the 4 major network operators in the country a total of 74 million naira for various infractions. This is from the Guardian newspaper. Fred, they're in trouble again. We keep hearing of fines here, year after year, year on year out. What's your take on this story?
Yeah, so this is actually my sector. So NCC obviously is the governing body that regulates the telcos in regards to their activity, making sure like the customers' best interests are put in hand. Right? These fines, they're actually relatively cheap, lower than what we'd heard in the past, right? So, but it's still it's in regards to SIM card registration, the processes, and how those are being done. Because obviously you want to protect the authenticity and the credibility of the thumbprints and the information that you're getting, right? So I just continue to encourage obviously NCC to do what they're doing to make sure they're looking after the consumers.
And also protecting these organizations as well, because at the end of the day, they do contribute to economic prosperity.
Obviously, the telcos, the infusion of the telcos in the country have massive positives, right? In regards to creating jobs, just also making us more productive as a people and all of that. But they too also face a lot of costs, like it is diesel costs, running operational costs, leakages up and down, but they still, need to be, checked. Make sure people are getting.
But it's very important to note that the fines are not just on SIM card registration infraction, on approved promos, advertisements, failure to provide information on collapsed tires and all that.
Yeah, and NCC regulates those things.
Are they still finding them for unsolicited text messages and adverts? I hope so.
They're checking everything. NCC is like it's a shock right now.
All right, our final story here. Thank you, Fred. The federal government not doing enough to fight Lassa fever. Now, very, very important story right here, and this is from the Nigerian Medical Association. Tunde, you know that last year was reported another outbreak of Lassa fever, and this year already hundreds of deaths have been recorded.
So you see, one of the cardinal, as a World Health Organization, one of the cardinal principles for dealing with Lassa fever is early detection and treatment. With the way we've been, the NMA has been ringing this bell and clearly we're failing on that point. The other thing that's not happening is obviously antivirals are important it's because it's a viral disease. Is the government doing enough to provide antivirals after infections have happened? Then, very key to this, as the WHO advises, key to preventing Lassa fever is education, community engagement, and promoting clean habits to prevent rodents from coming into the homes. Because Lassa fever, the primary mode and method for transmitting Lassa fever is our rodents, rats, their feces and their urine. I'm sure most of the nation doesn't know, right? So there is very little education that's out there. There's very little information, and we're not seeing any of those campaigns like we used to see back, decades ago when there's something that affected the nation, and they come up with a nice jingle and advert, and let people engage with it. ORT was popular. We don't do those things anymore.
Now, it's important you mentioned that, and also where the target area for these adverts and communication is for. Usually the rural areas where
Yes.
this is predominant,
Where it's
we don't have enough sensitivity and engagement in that way. But thank you so much, Tunde. Unfortunately, this is all we can take this morning.
There's quick messages in here. Awali from Lekki says, everyone go out and vote tomorrow. Stay safe. I'm waiting to see which private sector company she adds that will partner with Lagos State government on a health insurance scheme. The government has a woeful reputation when it comes to private sector partnerships. Look at Visionscape and the late payments by the government. No continuity, she said. And the entire saying, hello to and John Joy Abuda says, creating free, affordable healthcare before putting in place the needed healthcare facility and infrastructure is putting the cart before the horse. All right, Lagos, we come back in 15 minutes to talk sports inside the locker room. A special thanks to our analysts for stepping in this Friday morning. Folu Storms, she's on Folu Storms on all social media platforms. And Tunde Okufi, thank you for coming in. That's Tunde.
Thank you.
Mr. Fred is at Mr. FB Allison on Twitter. Good morning, Lagos.
Good morning.
Morning.
Best where money never
Right.
sleeps.
Thank you.
Tonight is big coups. Big coups.
Oh, what did you call me?
What did you say?
Tunde Okufi.